What's up, everybody? It's Jared with Capture the Magic, and when it comes to Star Wars, it's kind of interesting currently how Disney is sort of approaching Star Wars, because you have the new Mandalorian and Grogu movie that is going to be coming out over Memorial Day weekend. The projections there aren't looking great, and it also seems in the theme parks and the marketing that Disney is trying to lean more into the original trilogy and the prequel era of Star Wars, and not really acknowledging much about the sequel trilogy. It's an interesting little dichotomy here, so we're going to go through what are the opening weekend projections for Mandalorian Grogu, where does that rank with previous Star Wars movie releases, and is Disney trying to go back to the old faithful of the original trilogy and the prequels in the theme parks to try and draw more people into Galaxy's Edge? We're going to go through this, talk about it all, and get some thoughts on it. Alright, so when it comes to the Mandalorian and Grogu, I'll just also say this. It's very strange that this movie, it's essentially like the fourth season of The Mandalorian that's coming out as a movie. I've always felt that's kind of odd. But the opening weekend projections is currently showing 71 million plus for the 3-day opening weekend, which is not great when you're looking at especially a Star Wars movie, and we have not had a new Star Wars movie come out ever since 2019, The Rise of Skywalker. A lot of Disney Plus shows, but no movies in basically almost 6 to 7 years. So if you're looking at this, where does that type of opening weekend line up? And I had ChatGPT here bring up some of the opening weekends, and we're going to compare this to inflation as well. So of the top tier openings, you had Star Wars The Force Awakens at $247 million opening weekend, The Last Jedi $220 million, and The Rise of Skywalker, $177 million. So you can see the trajectory there of the sequel trilogy and how those kind of went after The Force Awakens. You also had Rogue One, had $155 million opening weekend. Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, had $108 million. Some of the mid ones, Episode 2 was $80 million. But you're also talking a different era of movies at this point, but we can still compare it. Solo, A Star Wars Story, which was really the biggest flop at the time that Disney had with Star Wars, was $84 million of its opening weekend. But it gets even worse, actually. If you compare this to inflation, if you look at these openings and bring inflation into it, where it would be in the numbers today. The Force Awakens will be $320 million, The Last Jedi $275 million, and The Rise of Skywalker $215 million. Rogue One would be $200 million. Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, would be $170 million. Solo, A Star Wars Story, would be $100 million opening weekend, and Episode 2 would be $135 million. Even Episode 1 would be $125 million opening weekend. So if this movie does open at $71 million or $80 million for the opening weekend of this movie, this will be the worst opening weekend for a Star Wars movie, especially since Disney has bought it. And I think this directly reflects really where the Star Wars fan base is, which I would simply say is in shambles. I mean, I'm not saying anything that hasn't been talked about for years when it comes to Disney and LucasFilm ever since they bought Star Wars, and really what has happened with that franchise will be books written about how did you take a cash cow like Star Wars and basically have it become where nobody cares. And I think that's the thing about Star Wars, is it's an apathy in terms of the fan base and people just really not caring. And then you throw into the fact as well, like I said before, this is essentially a Disney Plus show that you're now having a movie for the fourth season. So there's a lot of assumption that everyone's going to be caught up on what's been going on Disney Plus with The Mandalorian. And then really, where does this fit in with the future plans for Star Wars, which I would say is really up in the air at this point. I don't think this points to a great performance here, and it very well could be the worst performing Star Wars movie that Disney has ever released. So while that's going on, you also have the news we talked about in a previous video a couple months ago that Disney announced that they are bringing original trilogy characters to Galaxy's Edge in Disneyland. Now, I do think this will come to Disney World, but they are starting in Disneyland, where you're going to be able to meet Han, Luke, and Leia out there. I am going to say there's been a lot of online flack about especially Leia and Han, of what they showed in the commercial here of the characters that you can meet in Galaxy's Edge out in Disneyland. Of these characters, some people said they didn't look like Han, doesn't look like Leia. I know for a fact that these are Disneyland cast members playing these characters. They were put into this commercial. So I don't think going after them is really appropriate because it's not their fault. They were just doing a job and wearing the wardrobe and costume that they put them in. So I think it's kind of an unfair position that Disney has put them in, personally speaking. And I know the internet's going to do the internet thing, so I'm not going to go after them for that because it's not their fault. What I will say, though, is what Disney probably should have done is actually got some actors that were for the commercials that looked more like the original trilogy characters, and then you just have the characters you can meet day to day in the theme parks, because nobody would really say anything at that point. But by putting them front and center, I understand why they were probably doing it, but it did open them up to a lot of online criticism, especially given where Star Wars is and the anger that is in the fan base of what Lucasfilm and Disney have done to Star Wars. So I will say that just as my piece there. So I'm not going to go after anybody and how they look or anything of that nature, because I just don't think it was their fault. It wasn't the cast members' fault, but I will say Disney didn't put them in a good spot. But obviously Disney is changing Galaxy's Edge. They're almost admitting that they have made a mistake here and basing Galaxy's Edge after the sequel trilogy alone, which I've always said was the dumbest thing you could have done with the Star Wars land, not even have Star Wars music in this land, which they are going to add here. So in many ways, Disney's kind of admitting they messed up here, although they'll never say it publicly. They're never going to come out and say, we messed up, and now we're going to put the original trilogy in the prequel eras into Galaxy's Edge because, hey, oops, we goofed. They're never going to do it, but they're kind of openly admitting that. And then at the same time, the Disney store over on Twitter X has a new shirt line that they're releasing. It says, "Your destiny awaits. Will you receive one of the 6 episode Spirit jerseys or the special chase style? The Star Wars mystery box lands on April 24th at 8 a.m. Pacific time." Now you'll notice they said 6 episodes. And what are they featuring in this shirt line? Well, it's kind of interesting. So you'll notice that they have a new shirt line that they're promoting that is the prequel era and the original trilogy, but not the sequel trilogy. I find this hilarious. And they're doing this because they know good and well that if they had the sequel trilogy as part of this shirt collection, those wouldn't sell. But the original trilogy and the prequel trilogy, those potentially could sell. So Disney now is leaning back into that they did not create to try and drum up more interest in Star Wars, trying to sell shirts and merchandise by essentially trying to act like they are embracing the prequel and original trilogy eras, whenever Disney decided when they bought Star Wars, they weren't going to take George Lucas, story treatments for the sequel trilogy, and essentially saying, we are going to base Galaxy's Edge on the sequel trilogy because this is going to be so much better. Nobody's even going to care about the prequels or the original trilogy because the sequel trilogy is going to be so good. Liar! Obviously, that didn't happen. Now, why would they do this if there was all this interest in the sequel trilogy? Why would they be changing Galaxy's Edge if there was all this interest in the sequel trilogy? It's obviously because there's not. And they're openly admitting that they messed up without even saying as much. And they're never going to admit it. But you're seeing a major corporation in real time try and gaslight you into thinking that they always embrace these and that, oh, we love them as much as you do, when they did not. And to elaborate on this, I came across this post from Peachy Keenan, who used to work at Disney. And she says here in a Twitter post, "I was at Disney when the land launched," talking about Galaxy's Edge. "In fact, I personally wrote a lot of the copy for the Star Wars land rides and the Star Wars hotel in the marketing materials and for the website. When I say there was a crushing disappointment, almost a feeling of betrayal, that the whole thing was on the new IP and not the original IP, I am not exaggerating. Disney made the decision to invest this money in order to support the new trilogy, which they thought would erase the old one in the minds of fans. The level of hubris around this is one for the business industry history books." 100%. I mean, the level of hubris and just out of touch with this was always just off the charts. Bob Chapek, who was head of parks at the time, since fired in disgrace, was in charge of greenlighting all creative in Star Wars land.
That's a choice.
He killed things like a life-size bantha ride where guests would ride around the land on top of a bantha. He killed the live show at the cantina. And most importantly, he gave the land its own lame subplot where you had to use your phone to scan kiosks and get some code messages deciphered so you were, quote, part of the resistance, but it had no payoff. Then reality struck. They made a trilogy that destroyed the OG characters. They elevated an insufferably annoying Mary Sue girl boss, completely agree, added a pathetic loser son of Han, a divorced Leia and Han, a disillusioned and bitter Luke, and then killed Luke, Han, and Leia. Result, J.J. Abrams' career was finished as a filmmaker, Rian Johnson was wrecked, Kathleen Kennedy is finally out as head of Lucas, Chapek out, Disney movies are garbage. The greatest entertainment IP ever created was lit on fire to appease the egos of the geniuses who bought it and they thought they could outdo the original genius. And now it's too late. No one cares that Darth will be walking around again to John Williams' score. My kids all took part in lightsaber battles against Darth Vader many times. It was hilarious and thrilling. Killed in favor of the new slop. Absolutely over. I mean, it's really hard to argue against that in terms of the Galaxy's Edge lands that we got in the theme park, and really where Star Wars is and who's at fault here, which is Lucasfilm and Disney. I mean, they're the ones that set all this up. They're the ones that had the hubris about this. And really, they are 1,000% the ones to blame for this. They can blame the fan base and all these things that they want to do anytime that there's criticism about Star Wars. But now people see it for what it is, and it's just bad storytelling. And the hubris to think that you could create a sequel trilogy that would be bigger and better than what George Lucas created with the original trilogy and the prequels. I mean, that alone should disqualify anybody who ever had anything to do with these decisions being involved in making movies and shows in the future, in my opinion. I think it's just basically unforgivable at this point what they have done with this franchise to see where it currently is, where you have a new Star Wars movie coming out after 6 or 7 years without one, and it's looking to open under $100 million on a 3-day weekend. And I find all this funny because I've often joked, but I think it's actually true, that if Disney did nothing else when they bought Star Wars, if they didn't make any new movies, they just, sold merch, sold toys and shirts, they would have made more money doing that than they would have spending all the money they spent making the sequel trilogy, making the fan base angry, all the money they spent on all the shows on Disney Plus to get them where they're at now. I think they would have been better off never even making new movies and just selling merch and the toy lines that have basically the sales of the toys have fallen off a cliff compared to what they used to be. So Disney's in a very interesting predicament with this of trying to get it, hype and anticipation for the Mandalorian Grogu while also sort of openly admitting that they messed up when it comes to Galaxy's Edge. And so where does Star Wars go from here if this movie does not do well? I really don't know because, Kathleen Kennedy is gone now from Lucasfilm, but I've said many, many times, getting rid of Kathleen Kennedy is not going to fix the issues you have with Star Wars. I do not think Dave Filoni is a savior of Star Wars or the people that are still around at Lucasfilm. This is a problem that Lucasfilm has, and they basically just will not admit that they've made any errors. They will defend these movies and shows that they made, attack the fan base, which is one of the worst things that they started the trend of attacking a fan base of a popular franchise. And really where Star Wars is right now is deserved. It is deserved to where it's at, to the point where I don't even care. I mean, I'm talking about it on here because of the box office and seeing how far it's fallen. I have no real interest in seeing The Mandalorian Grogu. I think the first season of the show was pretty good, and as it went on, it just basically got worse and worse. And now you're talking about Star Wars as a whole. Nobody knows where it's at, where it's going, what are you planning to do in the future? And it's just a mess right now. So they're going to try and do a soft sort of, we're going to make some things right in the theme parks. We got some new shirt lines celebrating the movies you guys like, right? Oh, here's a new Star Wars movie coming out, thinking this will parlay this into a better box office run for The Mandalorian Grogu potentially, or future movies and shows that they do. But at this point, if you don't actually go in and fix the problems with Star Wars and actually apologize to the fan base and actually produce good quality content going forward, it's not going to matter. And I don't think that they're going to do any of that. So they're probably going to continue to make more shows and movies that are just going to have lackluster results, mid-opening weekends, and really they have nobody else to blame but themselves. But I find it funny in terms of how this is being projected of its opening weekend and what's going on in the theme parks to try and essentially make up for the things they should have done the first time, which is create a Star Wars land that celebrates all the eras of Star Wars. I don't care about the sequel trilogy, but if you want to open a land that has all the eras of Star Wars, that's fine. But just having a sequel trilogy alone and having the gall to assume that nobody is going to care about the prequels or the original trilogy, they're only going to care about Rey and Kylo Ren, is just preposterous. It always was preposterous, and it still is to this day, and it looks even worse. So I applaud them for making the changes to Galaxy's Edge. It's really the least they could do. I do hope, and I think it will come to Disney World, but the damage that has been done from this is potentially something you cannot recover from. And again, you could write stories and books and make movies on how you fumbled the bag of Star Wars this bad in such a short amount of time. It's quite astonishing, really. But where it was to where it is now is ultimately just really, really sad. And I don't think it's going to get any better anytime soon. It might get a little better in the theme parks, including some of the nostalgia eras of Star Wars. But in terms of Disney producing good quality Star Wars, I basically have no hope in that unless there is something drastic that changes with Lucasfilm. And I don't think firing Kathleen Kennedy or her walking away is the thing that's going to save Star Wars. But I really do hope I am proven wrong. I do hope that Lucasfilm does end up making better Star Wars shows and movies, and they go back to doing the things that they used to do when it comes to making these types of movies. I just have no faith that it's going to happen, and we're probably going to see this box office run for Mandalorian and Grogu be rather underwhelming compared to previous Star Wars movie runs, and it kind of just shows you where this franchise is and probably where it's going to continue to go. But we will see when this movie comes out how it does and how these new additions to Disneyland's Galaxy's Edge are received. And then if this comes to Disney World, we'll talk about it here and let you know about it when those things happen. But for now, that's going to be it though for this video. So if you like this video, please like it and subscribe to the channel as we do lots of coverage here of Universal Studios, Epic Universe, Disney World, and pop culture. And let us know in the comments, what do you think about all this? And until next time, we will see you in the parks.